Hey baseball fans, welcome to another episode of Purple Row Video. I'm Matt Gross, aka the Rhode Island Rocky fan, and we have reached the 1/3 mark of the season. Game 54 was last night against the Houston Astros, and the Rockies, as you know, have hit a rather disappointing stretch here over the last 6 games. They've lost 5 of those last 6 games, and really, ever since the Angel Pagan inside the park walk-off home run, the position players on this team have just not looked very good as a collective whole. There's been a couple of good moments, and the starting pitching has had some good outings. But as a whole, they just have kind of sleepwalked through the majority of the last week, and that's what happens when you do not play well. You can even lose 3 out of 4 to the Houston Astros, who are basically a dumpster fire this season. But now that we're a third of the way through the season, there's something interesting that I like to look at this point of the year. You get to a point now where the stats start to become a little more relevant. You can start to really look for trends that are developing. Some stats are relevant. Others are now close enough to becoming relevant to where you can really start to see where they're going to land when they actually get to that point. And one of the things that I really like to do is I like to look at teams at different points in the game, at how they're performing. Basically, I want to figure out where are teams winning and losing these games. And to me, one of the best things you can do is you can go to Baseball Reference, you can go to a team's page, and under the scoring tab, there is an area that gives you all these graphs. And they basically tell you, a little complicated to read, but they basically tell you how many times a team has been winning after an inning, how many times they've been tied after an inning, and how many times they have trailed after each inning. So what I did, courtesy of Baseball Reference, I had a little table below, and what we're looking at here is I took each team in the National League West, and I wanted to look at how many times they have led after each inning, and how many times they have trailed after each inning, and say how many more times have they led than trailed, or how many more times have they trailed than led, depending on what the situation tells. And I think the results to me are absolutely fascinating. They're infuriating to be a Rockies fan, maybe even more infuriating to be a Dodger fan if you look at it. But they absolutely are fascinating. So what I want you to look at specifically here is the 5th inning. So what that tells you is you're going to see the Rockies have an 11 next to their name after the 5th inning. The Dodgers have a 9 next to their name after the 5th inning. The Giants have a -13 next to their name. Those are really the ones that you want to look at closely. Because what that means specifically is that the Rockies have led 11 more times at the end of the 5th inning than they have trailed. So they have led 28 times, they have trailed 17 times at the end of the year. And the reason why I find this so fascinating and infuriating at the same time is that the Rockies have, at worst, a middle-of-the-pack lineup. I know that this has been a little bit of a contentious subject around Purple Row. Exactly how good are they? At the worst, according to WRC+, they rank 6th. It's sometimes difficult to nail down with the factors. However you happen to feel about them, there is no way they are worse than middle-of-the-pack. They're probably a little bit above average as a whole, not throughout the entire game, which is what I really want to get at here. But they're, at worst, middle-of-the-pack. And the bullpen ranks 4th in the National League in ERA. And that's not park adjusted. The only teams ahead of them are Pittsburgh, San Francisco, and Atlanta. And just looking at the numbers overall, if you park adjusted it, I'm pretty sure that the Rockies numbers would surge ahead of Atlanta and San Francisco. I'm not sure if they would get ahead of Pittsburgh, but they're at worst 4th in the National League, the bullpen, and they're probably better than that when you look at the number of innings they've mopped up. So then here's the question. Why is a team that has such a good bullpen and has at worst an average offense leading 11 more times than they're trailing at the end of 5 innings and only 2 games over 500? Unfortunately, the only conclusion that you can really draw, and I think this is about as close as you can measure it with sabermetrics, is that this team does not get enough meaningful hits. They do not engage, they are not successful enough when they have to engage in a battle. And what I mean by that is some games you're going to win going away. The pitcher's going to throw a shutout, only get 1 run. Sometimes you're going to score 8 or 10 runs. And then other times, you're just going to get shut out. The Rockies have had problems with that, too, where they've got shut out. And they have just made the opponent look brilliant when sometimes they were, sometimes they weren't. But the bottom line here is that when the Rockies get in one of these games where they need a big hit, they need to push runs across the plate, or even sometimes where the bullpen really needs to hold the opponent in the 6th or 7th inning, they fail to. It's much less the bullpen's fault than it is the offense's fault. And one thing you can look at, and some people may want to bring in numbers, say, well, look, the Rockies get worse in the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th inning offensively, and they do. But I don't think that's really a great measuring stick, because every team's offensive numbers, or just about every team's offensive numbers, the league as a whole, gets worse as the game goes on offensively. The OPS drops because relievers tend to have an opponent's OPS lower than the starters in general. So you really do need to put that into context. But to me, this table that we have below puts it perfectly into context. The Rockies should, with that bullpen and with that offense, be able to win more games than they have when you consider that they have led 11 more times than they have trailed at the end of 5 innings. Think about this. They've only trailed 17 times at the end of 5 innings. They've lost 26 games. So somehow, with this bullpen giving up a minuscule amount of runs, and a little bit too maybe at the end of the starting pitcher, because sometimes the starter is going to pitch into the 6th inning and give up more runs, like we saw last night. That would be one of those games where they were leading at the end of 5 innings, actually, and lost. But it really is, to me, if you look at the game as a whole, and again, I can't nail down every single detail for you without spending 5.5 hours going through all 54 game logs this year, but it definitely feels to me that this team, which should instill fear in the heart of the opponent, when you consider that they've got enough big bats in the lineup, they play at Coors Field, and they have a bullpen that can shut you down, they should be winning more games late. And right now, you just do not have much confidence that they're going to win these close games, unless they already have a lead and you get to the Belisle and Betancourt and Brothers part of the bullpen. Then you feel pretty good about it. But in these tight, tie game in the 7th inning, they need a big hit. They just have not gotten enough of those. And in some ways it's bad because they've thrown away a ton of games. In some ways it's good because that means there's still another level they can get to. They can be better than their record indicates. Now on the flip side of that, I want to take a quick moment to look at some of these other teams in the division. Number one is the Dodgers, amazingly, like the Rockies, they talk about throwing away some games. Theirs make a little bit more sense because their bullpen is not nearly as good as the Rockies' bullpen has been. But they have led 9 more times than they have shot at the end of 5 innings, and yet they are 8 games under 500. Part of that, and that made me immediately go look up how are they doing in the Kershaw and Ryu starts. And the Dodgers are only 6-5 in games that Clayton Kershaw starts, and they're only 7-4 in games that Unjin Ryu starts. So when you look at those numbers, that makes a little bit more sense just by looking at the table right away, saying they are not capitalizing on those numbers on their starts as good as those two have been. But also, they're probably going to start winning games at some point. They cannot continue to only be 6-5 or winning at that clip when Clayton Kershaw starts. So he starts again tonight, unfortunately, against the Rockies. So we'll see if something's got to give because the Dodgers keep blowing leads that he puts up there, and the Rockies can't really come back in much late in games. So something will have to give tonight when the Rockies meet the Dodgers here. But and the other one is that I know that you're looking at it as well, and to me it's just absolutely infuriating, is that the San Francisco Giants 13 games under 500, or have trailed 13 more times than they have led at the end of 5 innings, and yet they're 4 games over 500, which it pretty much confirms what you've been watching all year. Yes, your eyes are not deceiving you. They really are taking a bunch of games very, very, very late in the contest. Arizona's kind of been pretty consistent up. They've gone up to 10 games over at the end of 3 or 5 innings. I don't have the chart in front of me right now, but then they dip a little bit, and they pick up almost half the number of games over 500 right now are because of extra innings. The Diamondbacks have been very, very good in extra inning games. In fact, that's the difference between them and the Rockies right now. Another difference for them in the standings. But in any case, it's interesting stuff to look at. The Padres, in typical Padre fashion, are consistently boring from the 3rd inning on. They stay right at that point, a couple games below 500. But it's just some interesting numbers to look at. I thought you might enjoy seeing that, see really where they need to get better. But this Rockies team, as a fan, what I really, really want to see is I want to see them do better in games where they have to engage in battle. They've proven that they can beat the other team when it's starting pitcher versus starting pitcher. As you can see for the first 5 innings. I mean, just like we thought, right? The starting pitching would be the best part of the game, and the offense, and when the offense and the bullpen had to decide the game, that's when they'd be in trouble, right? Just like we all thought with baseball. It's just unbelievable the way this worked out. But we're going to see if these trends continue as the season goes on. Alright, I am way over on time, so that's a wrap on this episode.